completely destroyed. And I'll let you guys hear him speak about that.
What happens on the morning of Saturday morning, 3rd of January, I received a call from neighbors, actually from that neighbor over there. He said there was, the school was hit and it was completely destroyed by, well, he told me 2 missiles. And I find it hard to believe that this destruction is done by only 2 missiles. If that's true, then it must be a very good missiles. And he said he was concerned about our guard. Actually, we call him a guard watchman. You are a watchman, he's not a guard. We keep somebody in the school at night so he can watch the school. He was concerned about the guy. And he looked after the dust settled. We couldn't find him. And finally, I told him, keep looking. And at that time, Saturday in the morning, at that time, I could not leave my house and come. Otherwise, I have to wait till the daylight, till there is some movement in the streets so I can come. The guy kept looking and we found our watchman. He was by the basketball court, of course, and cut in pieces. And he was, it was very, very tragic event. And the school itself, the grounds, the building of the school was never used by militants. To the best of my knowledge, I cannot give you 100% assurances, but this belief or this statement is supported by testimonies from the neighbors. I asked all the neighbors, they said, no way. In fact, actually, we came to an understanding with those militants. And that's to keep the school away from this, and they kept their promise. They never bothered us. They never came and say, oh, this is a nice location, let's launch a rocket from here. They never came here. And besides the testimonies of the neighbors and the lack of evidence, we did not submit one ray of evidence that the school was ever used to launch rockets. And when the American embassy or the journalists or the media asked the Israeli army to give explanation why they hit the school, the answer they give is the matter is still under investigation and we don't have an answer. Until now, they don't have an answer. They are still investigating.
So, the American International School is one of many institutes that was attacked. But a more specific and, looking at the UN facilities, actually the UN just released a report recently, basically saying that very clearly, and obviously Israel is very, very upset with this, but basically saying that Israel intentionally targeted UN facilities, and this was something that caused a huge stir. It was very recent. It was yesterday. It was today actually that this happened. And it's when you look at the UN facilities, when you go there, and just looking at the circumstances surrounding the attacks on the UN facilities, it's very clear that this was not an accident. It was very intentional. So looking at one of the buildings that we visited, the UNRWA, this is where a lot of the humanitarian aid was housed: medicines, foods, blankets, tents, etc., etc. A lot of this stuff was housed in these warehouses. And on January 15th, 2009, Israel hit the facilities, they hit the warehouses, and they completely destroyed them. Now, this is extremely problematic when you're looking at the attacking of civilian infrastructure for a number of reasons. First of all UN facilities by law are required to have large UN letters, large blue UN letters on their roof, so they're very visible from the air. So if you're flying over, you can clearly identify a building as a UN building. Second of all, during the actual onslaught, the directors and the people that were working in the UN were in constant, they told Israeli officials all their coordinates. They told the coordinates of all the various UN facilities in Gaza. So they had the coordinates of the compound, they had the coordinates of the school, and in addition, during the attack, they were actually in real-time communication. So that means that they were actually on the phone with Israeli officials as attacks were happening. Now, on January 15th, it was clear that it was getting, the white phosphorus missiles were coming close to the compound. so John Ging and other people, the director of the UN, and others in the UN actually got on the phone and they spoke with the IDF. And they told them that your missiles are coming dangerously close to our compound. Now, the huge problem is that many, many Palestinian civilians were taking refuge in these UN facilities. Nobody was allowed to flee Gaza during this onslaught. There was only 200 foreign wives, non-Palestinian wives, that were allowed to flee. So basically everybody was stuck in Gaza. You have 1.5 million people stuck in 140 square miles of land. And so where did people go? There was no, there's no bomb shelters, there's nothing like that. It's not sophisticated like that. And so where did people go? A lot of them went and they fled and they sat in these, they took refuge in these UN facilities. And so this compound by itself, and it's on its own, held about 700 Palestinian civilians. So when John King and others were talking to the Israeli officials, they told them, we have 700, we have X amount of Palestinian civilians taking refuge in our compound. If you're going to hit this compound, you're going to kill everybody. And these are all civilians. They got assurances, don't worry, we know where you are, we have your coordinates, we see where you are, don't worry. Okay. They kept bombing. They got on the phone again. They said, there's also fuel tankers in this compound. If the white phosphorus missiles hit the fuel tankers will explode and will kill everybody inside the compound. Don't worry, we know where you are, whatever, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The rhetoric, and then moments later, Israel hit the compound. Despite their assurances that they would not hit the compound, they hit the compound. And there was 2 fuel tankers, again, full of fuel at that point. Luckily, they were able to move the fuel tankers. Otherwise, there would have been a huge explosion, and they're literally, like everybody in the compound, including the 700 Palestinian civilians, would have been killed. And they basically destroyed the warehouses. They destroyed tens of tons of humanitarian aid in the warehouses. And until now, when you go, you just see medicines everywhere. You see sugar, you see flour, you see car parts. It's completely destroyed. And again, 80% of Palestinians rely on humanitarian aid to survive. So this was a huge blow to the Palestinians. In addition, not only was the main compound in Gaza City hit, but many of the schools were hit. About 6 schools were hit total. You had one in Beit Lahia. There was 1,600 people, Palestinians, taking refuge in Beit Lahia at that school. And despite that, despite being in real-time communication, despite Israel having the coordinates of the school, and despite the fact that, again, they had the same UN letters on their roof, Israel still hit the school. Another incident was at Bahura, where they hit right outside of the school, and 40-some Palestinians were killed in that incident alone. Israel, one of the main things that you hear the Israelis say is, oh, there was Hamas firing from the area, and we were just hitting, and we had to respond. That's fine, but again, you have distinction and proportionality. War is ugly. That is why you create laws of war. And one of the laws of war is proportionality. If you are trying to hit the Hamas people and then you're going to wipe out 50 people in the process, that is not proportional, and that is not okay under international law. And one thing that John Ging, when we met with him, he was absolutely infuriated. He was completely infuriated because he saw this all happen before his eyes. He saw the compound blast into flames before his very own eyes. And one thing he said to us when we were there is that if 400 Israeli children were killed, what would the world say? And that's one thing that has happened. That's a problem, that Palestinians have been so dehumanized that they become numbers. It's like, oh, 1,400 Palestinians were killed, but X, Y, and Z Israeli was killed. And he can give you their names, their numbers, they can tell you how many children, where they're from, their autobiography. But these Palestinians are merely numbers. I doubt that any Israeli can even name a single Palestinian that was killed off the top of his head. These are cars right here, the UN cars, and if you notice, these are actual bullet holes in the cars. Again, specifically targeting. This is not collateral damage, this is specific targeting of UN facilities and UN cars. And again, civilian infrastructure, this is completely illegal. And under the Rome Statute, under international law, the targeting of civilians, it is so egregious to target civilian infrastructure and civilians, it amounts to a war crime, essentially. And so all this targeting of civilian infrastructure, this is all considered war crimes. We can talk more about that in a bit. The third allegation is, so we talked about civilian infrastructure.